Becoming leaders in their academic or research areas is the ultimate objective of many researchers or academics. However, achieving this goal is not easy and it's quite challenging. And in many cases will require guidance on the best strategies to use. To get that guidance today, we're pleased to have Dr. Fiona Denney, who is currently the Director of Brunel Educational Excellence Centre. She's got over 12 years experience in developing strategies for researchers in a number of universities in London, including Queen Mary's University of London and King's College London. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation today and welcome to Research Live.
Thank you for inviting me.
How do you define a research leader?
So I think that's a really interesting question because in academia generally in the UK, the definition that we would use for a research leader is somebody who is excellent in their field. And by excellent in their field, we generally mean somebody who has very highly rated publications, who leads a research group, particularly if they're in the biosciences and laboratory-based sciences, and somebody who is renowned for getting good grants, you know, a lot of grant income from research councils and so on, and the big funders. However, that doesn't necessarily describe the wider set of skills and abilities that a really good research leader needs. And in my view, we actually need to be defining a research leader more broadly within the sector. So you can have all of those kinds of things, but actually still not be regarded well in terms of how you interact with other people. And I think that good research leaders, really good research leaders, have to develop the skills for being able to manage quite complicated teams. They might be managing teams who are international, which are international, and managing people who they don't see very often. They've got to be really proficient at managing projects, managing finances. There's a whole sort of range of additional skills and abilities that we don't really talk to early career researchers about when they're developing. So I think in terms of really great research leaders, they're people who can do all of that and the really good publications and the really good grants.
Go a bit deeper on this concept. In your opinion, which quality are needed to achieve that status of academic research leader?
I don't think I could pick out just one quality. I think it's actually the way in which all of those different skills and abilities interact together in the individual person. I guess if I had to pick out one characteristic, which is something I talk a lot about to early career researchers, it's about being strong enough to put your head above the parapet and actually having really the courage of your convictions to tackle some quite difficult circumstances that can arise that are just part of sort of everyday people management and everyday difficult and complex project management. Leadership generally is quite a lonely thing, and leaders, and this is perhaps something that we don't talk enough about within academia, leaders have to be strong and they have to be strong enough to be able to be, to carry through the courage of their convictions, to do what they really believe is right, and to be strong in that regard. So I think that's something that probably stands out above anything else for me.
How is the teaching entering in this scenario? How do we improve the strategy in that?
Academics generally have to be good at three things. They have to be good at obviously the research side, which we've already talked about. Teaching, which is something that sometimes doesn't get a high enough status in a lot of universities. And then they've also got to be good at the leadership, management and administration. So generally we sort of look at it as a three-legged stool, really. And what often happens is that one of those legs gets out of balance in quite a number of situations. Obviously, part of my job here at Brunel University is to ensure that the teaching leg doesn't get out of balance. And we want people to be really good and inspirational teachers, as well as good and inspirational research leaders. And I think one of the things that is really important in that is the ability of academics to be able to take their research into the classroom and to inspire the next generation. Our students do all kinds of things, but some of them will go on to do PhDs and will we hope, have really illustrious academic careers. And I think it's really up to our academics to inspire the next generation through talking about the research that they do, through talking about the exciting developments that occur in their field, and through inspiring the students. So I think there's a real connection there between research and teaching. Teaching fundamentally is about the ability to be able to relate to people and the ability to believe in each individual person's capacity for development and for their capacity for growth. And I think we need to see a lot more staff in universities really understanding that actually that's a really, really important part of their job.
So you mentioned a number of strategies. Given your experience, currently being the director of Brunel Educational Excellence Centre, what are the potential challenges, particularly in terms of teaching?
So I think one of the biggest challenges, to be honest, is about getting teaching a high enough profile within the UK university sector. The UK university sector is made up of a lot of different universities with very, very different histories. But universities like Brunel, which are research intensive and research led universities, have a history really where they prize research over and above everything else. And so the biggest challenge for a centre like the Brunel Educational Excellence Centre, which I head up, is actually raising the regard for teaching across the university. Now that's something that we can't do alone. We have to have leadership right from the very top management, right from the Vice-Chancellor. And we're very, very lucky here at Brunel because the Vice-Chancellor is very, I think, almost outspoken in her regard for teaching and the need for teaching to have a higher status within the university. And there have already been some really important developments in terms of instituting academic education contracts, which are for people who want to focus more on the teaching and the teaching development side of things. They're going to be expected to do pedagogical research in their discipline area. They're key members of staff for us within the Beak Centre because they will be working with us on a lot of the professional development programmes that we're running for academics. So they're key individuals, and that's quite a special thing for a university like Brunel to be doing. And then really the other challenge is to do exactly what I've just said, really, to encourage and inspire the next generation through encouraging and inspiring our academics to take their exciting research into the classroom. And we have some fantastic research that goes on here at Brunel, really exciting stuff, and we want to see that being translated through to the students to inspire them.
What about in terms of the researchers or the academics, their personal challenges?
So I think that their own personal challenges really rest around having so much to do. And I think this is really replicated across the sector in the UK. Most academic staff, most researchers feel that they have about 100 million things to do and they're all top priority and time is very precious. And part of that is because the sector actually depends on quite a lot of goodwill. We call it collegiality, but fundamentally it's goodwill. And we actually rely on people within our university environment to do things just because they think that actually that's for the general benefit of the university and the university community. And actually what then happens is that staff become completely overloaded. So the good staff get asked to do more and more and more because we know that they can deliver really well. And I think that's probably one of our biggest issues, is that this over-reliance really on collegiality and goodwill, and therefore the over-reliance on staff who are already feeling demands pulling them in about 100 different directions. I'm not sure I've got an answer to that particular problem or a solution to that particular problem, apart from one of the things that I've done for quite a number of years is to work with both researchers and more senior academics on how to help them prioritise their workload and to think about sort of that all-important work-life balance.
Now to research, what are the strategies?
In terms of developing good researchers, so I think one of the things that has to happen is that researchers need to have a much broader set of skills than just being able to focus on their sort of fairly narrow research interest. So I think most universities are already quite good at developing researchers who are good in their field. You know, I think Brunel has a very good track record of developing researchers in all kinds of areas. But actually what we need to do is to encourage researchers to develop those wider sets of skills that I've already talked about. So they need to be confident, they need to be prepared to actually take on leadership roles, they need to be well prepared in terms of actually understanding what leadership is about. They need to understand some of the technicalities and processes that help universities to run in terms of committee structures, in terms of managing people, managing budgets, managing finances, all of that kind of thing, project management. And these, of course, are skills that not just prepare you for an academic career, but also if you changed your mind, decided that you wanted to go elsewhere, would actually prepare you for a career outside of academia. And the graduate school at Brunel, in common with a lot of other universities, has implemented, a researcher development program to help researchers develop those skills. I can't sort of stress strongly enough how important it is for researchers to be aware of their own career and personal development, as well as writing the papers, finishing their PhDs, all of which, of course, are really important in terms of getting a good research career job. But there's a wider set of skills that without those would leave you feeling sort of quite unprepared when you move on.
Well, okay, so now we have pointed out that one of the biggest challenges, in fact, the big workload. However, at the same time, you're pointing out that we need to broaden our skills. How do we tackle the two things at the same time? How do we manage to actually increase further the workload with broadening our skills, but still managing to do our good research and publish and everything else?
So I think you ask a very good question. And the answer really lies in being able to identify the difference between things that are important and things that are urgent but not important. And one thing that I would really recommend that you do is actually to read Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in that book, he sets out a matrix for identifying what tasks are important and urgent. So he has 2 axes, one of which is urgent and not urgent, and one of which is not important and important. And what he says is that the tendency is for people to focus on tasks that are urgent and immediate, but are actually not that important to them. So, and he gives some guidance on how you deal with tasks that other people are saying are urgent, but which actually might not be important to what you need to do and in terms of your priorities. So that's one area. And we have a tendency, I think, as normal human beings to respond to urgent things and do lots of firefighting. And as a result, the really important things which might require scheduling and much more time investment, we tend to leave on one side, they don't get done. Now he identifies a quadrant on the matrix of things that are important but not urgent. And personal and career development actually falls into that quadrant, because that's about the set of things that are really important for you to develop in terms of your longer term career and your progression. But the tendency is, because you've got an experiment that's got to be done, or you've got to do this paper, or you've got to do that, that actually the things that you need to invest the time in therefore just get shunted to the bottom of the list. Now what Stephen Covey recommends is that actually you schedule time for those important but not urgent things that require you to invest that time. And you say, right, on Thursday morning between 10 and 12, actually I'm going to spend that time doing some career planning. I'm really going to take time to do the Researcher 3D tool that the graduate school set out here. I'm actually going to plan which courses I'm going to attend, and I'm going to think strategically. I'm just going to spend those 2 hours really planning and thinking about that. And that's how he says, people who are really successful, they make sure that they don't compromise on that time. Now, also what goes into that quadrant are things that actually benefit your overall health and well-being as well. So exercise, perhaps preparing food that's healthy for the rest of the week, that kind of thing. And actually spending some time there really investing in the things that keep you going and which help you longer term.
I see. So actually, looking at this, then in fact what we're saying is that we need to have a sort of block of time set up and scheduled during the week to do something. So now my question is about block of time against multitasking, because that's one of the big challenges that, for instance, I found personally and lots of my colleagues too. What would you suggest?
Yes, we joke a lot about multitasking in the modern environment. We joke about women being better at multitasking than men, and we joke about sort of being able to multitask when you've got your iPhone in front of you and you're doing 101 other things. And those are kind of the more comic images that we have around multitasking in modern life. I might be making myself quite unpopular by what I'm about to say, but actually I don't think that multitasking is good for anybody. Multitasking, in my view, is more or less the ability to do a number of things quite poorly at the same time. And if you really want to do things well, then actually you need to focus on one thing at a time. And one of the other things that I say to more senior staff when I'm talking to them about work-life balance, if you're on your email and your texts and you're supposed to be spending time with your kids at the same time, guess what? You're not spending that quality time with your children. You're on your email. That's where your attention is focused. And actually, if you really want to have time with your children, then you need to be radically prepared to put your email and your texts and your phone down and actually invest that time. And I think, again, it comes down to what's really important here. You know, is it really important that I respond to all of these emails, or is it really important that I actually invest my time on writing that paper really well, or on spending time with the people who really matter in my life? And actually, I think it's about priorities.
Once you become a leader, how do you maintain that status?
I mean, it's a really good question. And again, I'm not sure I've got one simple sort of formulaic answer to that. I think a lot of it is about keeping up with what's current in your research field. It's about identifying where the winds of change are coming from and being able to keep up in terms of, taking your projects in those directions so that they will attract grant funding, so that you'll actually be able to get your research published, that you'll be invited to international conferences and so on. So I think that's one side of it. I think the other side of it is more complex, and it's about how to maintain a presence and how to network. And I think networking is really, really underrated in academia. Networking, when you talk about it, tends to have this rather bad image attached to it, and people get really uncomfortable when you say, well, networking is really important. Networking, quite simply put, is about building effective working relationships with people. It's about being interested in who they are and what they're doing, and saying to them, well, actually, I might be able to help you out on something, and let's keep in touch, and so on. But actually, those networks, those relationships are really important in terms of future career development. And they're also important in terms of maintaining a presence. So if, for example, I have built a good working relationship with you and we keep in touch, and then one day you're organising a conference at Brunel years after I've moved on somewhere else, you might think, Fiona was really interested in that particular topic, perhaps I'll come and ask her to speak. And that's what then helps me to maintain a presence and therefore to maintain sort of a leadership presence within the field. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is, just in order to be a good research leader, it's about being able to do those myriad of things that I talked about earlier. Being able to manage people well, being able to get on with people, build effective relationships, manage the finances, manage the project, deliver, and all of that kind of thing, and also be collegiate. And the reality is, you've got to be able to do all of those things in order to maintain your position as a research leader.
On that note, a big thank you for making time out of your busy schedule to talk to us today. Thanks for the advice.
Thank you for the invitation.